Alright, so the next thing that I want to talk about that we'll be doing in this course is the case problems and how we're going to answer those using the IRAC method. You may be wondering, what is the IRAC method and what are case problems? So if you wanted to find the case problems, you'll find them under each week. There will be some sort of case problem. See, there's a link to the problems for week 1. Here is a link to the ones for week 2. And so what is a case problem? Well, I'll show you using this example. A case problem is going to give you some factual scenario, and then you're going to have to analyze that scenario based on the material that we've covered that week in the course. So for instance, here we have a fact scenario where Juan, who lives in Sacramento, California, was injured near his home when an out-of-state car driven by Bill from Seattle, Washington, negligently struck him. Juan is going to sue Bill for $200,000, which was the amount of his injuries. And we need to know which courts have jurisdiction over this matter and where should he file his lawsuit. So, how do we answer this using the IRAC method? Well, here is how the IRAC method works. And I find it really useful because it gives you a roadmap on how to answer these factual case problems. Before I started requiring students to use IRAC, the answers that I got were quite frankly very bad. And this really seems to help by giving a roadmap that you can follow. So the I in IRAC stands for issue. You want to identify and state the legal issue presented by the fact scenario, and that should just take 1 or 2 sentences. In the fact scenario we just looked at with Bill and Juan, the issue was which courts have jurisdiction over this case, or where could this lawsuit be filed. And so usually at the end of the fact scenario, it's going to more or less give you the issue. So that shouldn't be too hard to pick out. Once you have the issue, then you need to state or define the legal principle that applies to the issue. That's the rule. That's the R in IRAC, rule. The legal rule or principle that applies to the issue at hand. And that may be a particular legal term, and maybe you just need to give the definition of that term. It could be a legal concept, like when we talk about negligence, we'll see that there are 4 elements to a negligence case, and so maybe you have to state those 4 elements and tell what they are. But the rule is something that you should probably be able to find straight out of the book. And you can put it in your own words if you want to, but that's one area where you can probably pull that legal definition or principle straight out of the book. Once you've identified the rule that applies, then you've got to analyze. How does this rule or legal principle relate to the fact scenario? And this is the part of the answer that I'm most interested in and that I'm really going to look at. This should be the most lengthy portion of your answer. You should explain how the facts relate to the law. And we'll look at an example of that in just a minute. And then once you've finished your analysis, just state your conclusion in a sentence or 2, what you think the outcome should be. And so that is the IRAC method. You're stating the issue presented by the fact scenario. You're stating the rule, the legal principle that applies to the issue. Then you're analyzing it. How does the rule fit with those facts? And based on that analysis, then what is the conclusion? And so here's a sample answer to the case that we looked at earlier. We have our issue, which courts have jurisdiction to decide Juan's case. That was the issue that we needed to decide. Then we have our rule. And the rule here might be a little more lengthy than normal, but the legal principle that applies here is jurisdiction. Jurisdiction, as defined by the text, is the authority of a court to hear and decide a case. A court has to have both personal and subject matter jurisdiction in order to hear a case. And so we need to define what is personal jurisdiction and then what is subject matter jurisdiction, and we do that here. Once we've identified that rule, then we need to analyze and consider where did the incident occur, where do the parties live, and we have to apply that to the definitions of jurisdiction. And so we have a very thorough analysis here. You can see how the analysis is way longer than any other part of the answer. So just try to be thorough in your analysis, because that's what I'm looking at. That and the rule, but primarily the analysis is where I'm looking to make sure that you're thinking it through and that you are understanding the legal principle and how it applies. And then at the end here we have a conclusion, and I'm not concerned about what conclusion you reach as long as it's supported by your analysis and isn't totally out there in left field. So primarily I'm looking at the rule and the analysis. And so that is how the IRAC method works. And if you have questions about it as you go through, and if you are unsure about your answers, if you've got the concept down, feel free to send me a draft of your answer and I'll look at it and give you some feedback before the assignment is due. But use that IRAC method. It gives you a good roadmap to answer these case problems, and for each week there will be 2 or 3 case problems, so not a huge amount, but enough that you'll have to use what you've learned and apply it to the facts presented. All right, so good luck with the case problems and the IRAC method.